Hi, this is Kevin Sweeney, and welcome to Business Strategy 450 Week 8 lectures. If you've listened or seen my blog this week, you know this lecture is going to be fairly brief, and so I'm going to jump right into it. Just a couple of quick notes. First, deadlines have been moved from 10 p.m. to 11:59 p.m., essentially midnight. The only reason I say 11:59 is it's easier not to have to change the dates. If I go to midnight, it's the next day. So I've done that because there was both a request during the evaluation period and during my first mini open house. I got that request again and ultimately also got a compelling argument. So I've made that change. So anytime there's a 10 p.m. deadline in any of the materials, you should assume it's 11:59, and hopefully that makes people's lives easier. Get me anything that's due on March 13th before you leave for spring break. That means at 11:59 p.m. now, or midnight on the end of the day on March 13th. But I want to get that stuff before you leave for spring break. You also should notice there's a few new features in BStrap 450 Network. I've added BBC News video and Bloomberg Business Week. As you know from the beginning, I've encouraged people to stay connected to the news and to business news in particular, and I thought that by having these two features added to the network, it might make that a little bit easier for you. The agenda for this week is pretty straightforward. We're going to be looking at international strategy. As I said, there'll be a brief lecture in these slides and a significant focus on China, which will be in BStrap 450 Network. You have to go there. The most significant content for this week resides in BStrap 450 Network. If you don't go there, you're going to miss a lot. You're going to miss significant video content, written content, and the discussion forum, which is also significant. So please go there this week. Thanks. Let's talk a little bit about international strategy. And again, this is really going to be highlights from the book, and I'm going to go through them fairly quickly. I thought that this chart in the book is pretty helpful, and it identifies the reasons that you might seek out international opportunities, because they may increase your market size, give you a greater return on investment, create economies of scale or capacity to learn. You may have locational advantages. Those are all reasons you might enter into a strategy, and then the book has broken things out into subsets of types of business strategies, which really begin to do two things. One, line up with some of the materials that are out on my blog, but also line up to some degree with some of the key elements which are outlined in other discussions that we've had already up to this point. International business level strategies are really no different than the business level strategies that we've talked about previously. They're just being done locally. A multi-domestic strategy is a strategy where you've decided to have a series of local strategies and that the inputs from your corporate office really don't have a significant effect on your day-to-day operations. A global strategy is sort of the inverse. This is where your central operations dictate what's happening, and you have a strong belief that globalization would allow you to be able to do this effectively. A transnational strategy is really a strategy that's a hybrid between the two. If you spend some time reading my blog this week, you'll see how I've woven those concepts into the discussion, and I would encourage you to spend some time reading there. The specific modes of entry, I'm going to spend a little bit more time talking about in a couple minutes, and then I'm going to talk about some of the risks that you have to deal with in the next couple minutes. Again, at the sort of corporate level, there are three levels of entry. There's global, transnational, and multi-domestic. This chart really illustrates it, I think, a little more effectively than the previous chart. My focus in this course is going to be on transnational strategies, because I tend to believe that either multi-domestic or global strategies are too heavily weighted in one direction or another. And again, I'd encourage you to read my blog, where I spent some time talking about the sort of redefined global strategies based on semi-globalization, and I think you'll understand my point of view, and I'd be interested in your thoughts and comments in response to that point of view. Again, as I said earlier, I was going to cover just very quickly methods of entry, and I think one of the themes here is we've talked about many of these in other contexts. First of all, exporting. This is one we haven't really spent as much time on. This is relatively low expense, except in terms of the ability to get materials abroad. It's more contractually driven. Clearly, as it says, the low expense except the high transportation costs or tariffs that may be imposed. It does offer you a lot of control over marketing distribution of your products, but this is really, I'm here moving my product out. The next example of a mode of entry is licensing. This involves also low cost. It's similar to exporting, but it allows the licensee to absorb most of the risk. So you're really just licensing your brand, your capabilities to a local manufacturer, a local service provider who takes on most of the responsibilities locally. Another example of a mode of entry is a strategic alliance. We spent a fair amount of time talking about this last week, so I won't revisit it in any detail. Obviously, it involves shared risks and resources among two partners. Typically means we're both bringing something to the table, and certainly enhances your ability to be competitive because you're using core competencies from each of the two sets of parties. But again, they're very difficult to manage because of incompatibility, conflicts, and other issues. So as we discussed last week, alliances or collaborative transactions pose their own unique sets of challenges. Acquisitions, I'm not going to even spend any amount of time on this other than to say that clearly you can use M&A as a vehicle for entry internationally into another market. As I said last week, they pose a whole range of challenges and interesting opportunities, but again, I'd encourage you to spend more time thinking about what we learned when we talked about M&A, and then just apply it in the international context, which is essentially what the book does. And then finally, you could establish what's known as a greenfield. That's a new wholly owned subsidiary in your in the local market. This can be incredibly costly. Involves significant amount of processes. Basically, you're building a whole new company. It does allow for you to have maximum control on a variety of levels because you've all the management, all the people involved are people that you've put there. And so on some levels, the argument is it could create some of the highest potential returns, but it carries probably the highest risk of any business model and is very difficult to execute on. Having been involved in at least one greenfield operation in Luxembourg, we continue to struggle to figure out exactly how to make that business grow beyond a relatively small scale. And that's really one of the biggest issues, is if you're entering a relatively mature market on a greenfield basis, you're going to be competing against businesses that have a significant greater presence with greater capabilities, and you'll typically not do as well as you would hope. This chart, which is also from the book, shows you the two major areas of risk in international that you need to be cognizant of. First is political risk. That is risk that's country specific. This chart shows some good examples. It can be war, it can be a crackdown from a democratic perspective in a particular market, anything like that. The second of these is economic risks, and those include things like currency risk. Those include issues like counterfeit products. Those include trade agreements that influence your capacity to market your goods locally. So any of those sorts of things can be deemed economic risks. You need to be aware of both sets of risks as you enter other markets and understand how to manage them. The book, I think, covers this in reasonable detail. Just wanted to highlight that I would expect in your analyses, whether it's in the team projects or on a final exam, you should be aware of these risks and at least what they are, how to characterize them, and perhaps even how you might manage against them. All right, let's just cover what you have to do for this week. In the Week 8 discussion forum in BStrap 450 Network, the topic is Google Web 2.0 in China. It opens on March 8th and closes on March 13th. The discussion forum leaders will post from Tuesday through Thursday, and everyone else posts from Thursday through Sunday. As I noted in in the posting, and I've noted in my blog, if you're not scheduled to be a discussion forum leader until the last grading period for participation, week 11 through 15, please make sure you join at least 2 discussions during this participation grading period, which is week 6 to 10. On the flip side, if you are a discussion forum leader now, make sure you participate later in the year. And bottom line is, I need to have something to grade you on in each of those sections, each of those periods. So even though I'm looking for more abbreviated participation, a total lack of participation can result in no points during a particular grading cycle. Next week's agenda, spring break. So that means the real agenda is the agenda after spring break. We're going to talk about strategy implementation in the context of corporate governance. My apologies. We'll be talking about how organizations manage themselves from a governance perspective. Your assignments this week before you leave for spring break, be sure that I get your project team peer evaluations, and make sure that I get the project team status reports. Next week, there are no assignments. It's spring break. The week after that, you need to read Hit Ireland Hoskisson, Chapter 10, pages 284 through 309. The posted lecture, whether that's on Manhattan or in video format on BStrap 450 or YouTube. And then you need to participate in the BStrap 450 network discussion forum for that week, which opens on March 22nd and closes on March 28th. As always, if you have any questions or concerns, please contact me. My post office, via post office, is the best way to start. I'm glad to have telephone conferences. Certainly, if you can also use the upcoming mini open houses. I think that the first session this past week, went very well, and I appreciate all the comments and feedback I received in that session. But if for any reason you need to talk, I'm glad to do it, and we can schedule a call. I'm not going to be away on spring break next week. If you're not and you want to talk, I'll be available, but I'm not assuming that anyone's going to be in touch with me unless they want to be. And finally, I just want to say happy spring break. Enjoy yourselves. I hope you have a safe and healthy time away from school. And again, as I said, this particular lecture is intentionally brief because I think you need to spend a fair amount of time on the videos. There's one-hour video and some other materials that you need to review out on BStrap 450. So I just wanted to cover at a very high level some key points, and I look forward to working with you after spring break. Take care.